All right, welcome back to the channel. It's your boy Fanan. In this video, we're going to talk about Gervonta Davis, George Kambosos, and Devin Haney, and promoter Dibella had to say about who they are going to fight most likely next. Let's talk about that in this video. All right, welcome back to the channel. Before we get into the video though, please make sure if you like the video at some point, make sure you hit that like button. Also, if you're not subscribed, subscribe for your boy, hit the bell icon, all that good stuff. Now let's talk this boxing. We're going to talk about the lightweight division and what is going to happen next with all of these belts. George Kambosos beat Teofimo Lopez last weekend. Devin Haney is fighting Joseph Diaz Jr. tonight on DAZN. Gervonta Davis is going to be fighting Isaac Cruz on a Showtime pay-per-view tomorrow night. And so there's a lot of questions about what's going to happen after these fights, after all these fights wrap up. Dibella, who is the promoter for George Kambosos, was on an interview and basically laid out what he thought was going to happen next and gave some pretty interesting information. And that is that the conversations have already begun for a fight between Gervonta Tank Davis and George Kambosos. Now, he was asked, and please forgive me, Dan Canobio, I do believe is his name, Inside the Ropes podcast, asked him like, hey, I heard that, you guys are, that Devin Haney is the front runner for that fight. And he's going to be ringside to watch the DAZN fight this weekend with Devin Haney and Jojo Diaz. And that's where Kambosos and those guys were leaning. Well, Dibella all but shut that down and said, look, I don't really have, there's never a scenario where I have sole control over who a fighter fights. Sole control over who a fighter fights. What a fighter wants to do is very, very, is always really, really important. But then when he starts discussing what's going on next, he says, look, we're already in talks and I've already been having discussions with the PBC about a fight with Gervonta Davis and George Kambosos. And, George Kambosos he's a Australian guy. He's going to want to fight in Australia, but pretty much leans in and says, look, man, that this is prize fighting. And what we're going to do is we're going to go for the biggest fights, the biggest money fights that there are out there. And so he says that fight is the Gervonta Davis fight, right? He also says, we also talked a little bit to Top Rank about Vasily Lomachenko, but honestly, I think my guy Richard Comey is going to beat Vasily Lomachenko, so that's not going to be an option. But then when he talks about Devin Haney, he was very, very specific with Devin Haney, and he says, look, that may happen sometime in the future. And that was the quote that Dibella used for him. That fight may happen sometime in the future. And he said, look, he's a terrific fighter. Love Devin Haney. He's fighting Jojo Diaz. That's a good stylistic matchup for him. It'll be a war or whatever, but it should make, Devin Haney should win that fight and he's going to look good. But look, man, we're here. This is prize fighting. So what we're going to do is we're going to be looking for the biggest prize. And then he said, and the doors to the PBC, that door has reopened. So we're going to continue to talk. Now, if you know anything about Dibella and Dibella Entertainment, most of the income that they were making for several years, or the big fights that they were having, were with the PBC. They had a falling out with the PBC when he tried to start doing business with DAZN. I don't know all of the details to what that fallout was about, but that Dibella Entertainment was getting significantly fewer fights on DAZN than they were getting over there with the PBC. He was pretty much the lead promoter on a lot of the fights and lead organizer on a lot of fights for Showtime and for Fox up until they had that falling out after the Deontay Wilder Tyson Fury 1 fight, when he tried to get Deontay Wilder, I believe, Deontay Wilder a meeting with DAZN. And it is pretty much well known that, that Eddie Hearn is the dominant promoter over there on DAZN. So if Lou Dibella can get another in back with the PBC and bring them a big fight and start working with them, I think that Lou Dibella would probably want to do that. Also, when he's talking about George Kambosos, and I'm not saying he doesn't have confidence in George Kambosos, it really does seem as if he's got a lot of confidence in George Kambosos, that if George Kambosos is able to beat Gervonta Davis on pay-per-view, that allows for more of those type of fights to take place for George Kambosos, and it's just a lot more money for George Kambosos, and hence Lou Dibella. Where if he fights Devin Haney, he'll fight Devin Haney on DAZN. They'll have to split the money with DAZN and Eddie Hearn, and pretty much make that a matchroom type of fight. And so it just seems like he's a lot less amenable to that fight than the Gervonta Davis fight. And I believe that that's where it's going to go. Now, Gervonta Davis has also done his bit of talking, obviously, where he said, look, man, bring George Kambosos on, but, keep all those belts. I'm not interested in all of those belts that he has, but, that he would fight him. Well, if they're able to make, and this is where I say that, that Gervonta Davis is saying certain things, but the people that are involved, that are making the fights, the Floyd Mayweather Jr.'s, the Leonard Ellerbys, the Lou Dibella, those guys do understand that all of those belts, that Gervonta Davis having all those belts on the line for a pay-per-view fight with George Kambosos will significantly increase the pay-per-view sales of that fight and create more money that might offset the cost of those belts, right? And then if and when he wins the fight, then he could say, okay, well, I don't need to hold these belts anymore, and he can drop the belts and go on about his business after having been what I guarantee they will say is an undisputed championship. Now, they also addressed with Lou Dibella, Dan Canobio, please forgive me for probably killing his name, asked him, like, well, wouldn't a fight with Devin Haney be an undisputed, for the undisputed title, right? And I'm telling you, Lou Dibella was so dismissive of the undisputed title that he was like, look, man, he's like, man, do not bring that BS to me. I'm not trying to hear it. He said, man, I've known you my whole life. Stop it with that. He's like, look, George Kambosos has so many belts that he might as well be undisputed now, right? So pretty much just took that whole undisputed thing, balled it up and threw it away and said, look, man, the guy's already got 3 belts and he's got a belt in the WBC. You can call him undisputed or not call him undisputed. It really doesn't matter, because at the end of the day, that doesn't spend money. The pay-per-view sales and the amount of money you can get for a fight does that. So when he's hot, it would probably make more sense for him to go for, because he's going to have an equally difficult time in both of those fights. Between Devin Haney or Gervonta Davis, George Kambosos, that's an equally difficult fight. Or, if you could say somebody, even if you say that Devin Haney is a harder fight, that's even more of a reason for him to go for the money early when he can go for the money. So that's what more than likely is going to happen now. Well, at least that's the direction that Lou Dibella wants it to go. Also, George Kambosos said something that I thought was telling and said, hey, man, I want to fight whoever it is going to make it look like we're going to be in a war and give us, what we want for the fans. Devin Haney against Joe Diaz is probably a little less likely to be a war than Gervonta Davis, who is definitely going to go in there and is definitely going to go for the knockout and try to wear you out. So even when George Kambosos was talking about the style of the fight, it sounded more like Gervonta Davis. When you hear about the money, it definitely sounds more like Gervonta Davis. When you hear about the relationship for the promoter and what is in it for the long range benefit for Dibella Entertainment and probably George Kambosos too, it would probably point to the PBC. So anyway, that's my take on the matter. Make sure that you let me know in the comment section what you think. And with that, I'm out. Peace.